February 3rd, 1946. The snow lay thick over Munich, muffling the ruins of a once proud city. Amid the shattered stones and skeletal frames of bombed-out houses, a small boy stood barefoot in the frost, his face chapped and his toes raw against the ice. He was no more than 8 years old, though war had carved an older look into his eyes. An American soldier, his helmet tilted back, knelt before the child and tugged at the frayed bootlaces on the boy's shoes. The boy flinched, startled by the soldier's touch. For him, hands had only ever carried blows, not care. Yet here was a man in the uniform of the conqueror, bending low, tying his shoes as though he were family. The image, simple yet startling, captured the strange paradox of post-war Germany. Children who had grown up under the shadow of harsh parents and collapsing order now found themselves comforted by men they had once been told to fear. The war had ended 8 months before, but its echoes lived on in every broken wall and every hollow stomach. Germany in 1946 was a land of silence, punctuated by hunger. Families were splintered, fathers gone to war graves, mothers stretched thin between survival and despair, children left wandering amid rubble that no longer looked like home. Allied bombings had reduced 25% of housing stock to rubble, and whole districts were nothing more than skeletal remains. In the bitter cold of that February, rations in the American zone had dipped to around 1,150 calories per person per day, barely enough to keep bodies warm, much less growing children. For many, survival depended on luck, theft, or the kindness of strangers. It is difficult now to imagine the mindset of a German child in those days. They had been raised in a culture where obedience was demanded and affection rationed even more severely than bread. Fathers, if they returned from the front at all, often carried tempers sharpened by loss and humiliation. Mothers, overwhelmed and exhausted, could be stern, withdrawn, sometimes even resentful. Harshness was not unusual. It was expected. A slap for disobedience, a sharp command for silence, cold meals eaten in fear. This was the rhythm of many homes, compounded by a society where survival left little room for tenderness. And yet, when the Americans marched in, foreign soldiers in olive drab, their rifles slung casually, their boots echoing on ruined cobblestones, the children braced for cruelty. They had been warned that the victors would come as monsters. Propaganda had painted them as brutes who would pillage and humiliate. The children imagined fists, not open palms. Scorn, not smiles. They expected conquerors to be harsher still than their own parents. But what happened instead unsettled them even more. These strangers offered comfort. A soldier would crouch low, pull a tin from his pack, and press it into a child's hand. Inside, canned peaches, sticky and sweet, a taste more luxurious than anything they had ever known. Another soldier might ruffle the hair of a boy who had been taught never to look an adult in the eye. Nurses in American field hospitals would brush a girl's tangled hair, untangling not only knots, but a lifetime of expectation that kindness was weakness. These were small gestures, but to children raised in scarcity, they landed like miracles. The story of Germany's orphans in those first winters after the war is not one of easy redemption. Many were suspicious, withdrawn, their trust broken by too many empty promises at home. A warm blanket handed across a barracks table could trigger tears, not gratitude, for it reminded them of nights shivering under thin rags. Soup ladled into their bowls was met with disbelief. What did these soldiers want in return? A shoelace tied by a giant in khaki seemed almost an insult to logic. And yet, as day followed day, the gestures piled up like snowflakes. Gentle, consistent, undeniable. Kindness repeated becomes a force of its own, harder to resist than cruelty. The Americans themselves were sometimes bemused by the effect they had. Letters written home described children who clung to them, wide-eyed, as if unable to let go. One GI joked that he had become a father to 20 without knowing a single name, simply because the children followed him wherever he went, drawn not by authority, but by the promise of warmth. K-rations designed for battlefields were mistaken by orphans for candy boxes. Cigarettes, which soldiers often used as currency, were sometimes broken apart and offered as scraps to children desperate for something, anything to chew on. To Americans, these were trivial handouts. To the children, they were treasures. And beneath the humor lay something more profound. For the orphans, many of whom had known only punishment or neglect, the Americans were revealing an alien possibility. Adults could be gentle. Authority could bend, not just strike. Food could be given, not withheld as leverage. It was disorienting to realize that strangers, men their parents had called enemies, could show them more patience and dignity than those who had given them life. It was as though the world had turned upside down, and in that inversion lay the seed of a new kind of hope. For the German children, miracles did not arrive in lightning bolts or booming revelations. They came in small, ordinary packages, wrapped in cellophane, fizzing in glass bottles, glowing under unfamiliar lights. To those who had grown used to bleak rations and cold discipline, the Americans brought not only food, but fragments of a world that seemed unreal. It was in these fragments, sticks of chewing gum, a sip of Coca-Cola, the sparkle of a Christmas tree assembled in a barracks hall, that orphans began to sense life could be more than endurance. The first time many of them saw chewing gum, they did not know what it was. Soldiers pulled shiny wrappers from their pockets, tore them open with practiced ease, and popped the sticks into their mouths. Children watched puzzled, then were handed their own. Some swallowed immediately, thinking it was candy, only to be gently corrected with a laugh. Others chewed tentatively, then marveled as the flavor lingered, a sweetness that refused to vanish. One soldier wrote home that German children treated the gum like gold, storing it on window ledges overnight, so they could chew it again the next morning. In a land where bread was scarce, gum became treasure, and treasure came from the hands of men they had once been told were enemies. Then there was the Coca-Cola. To Americans, it was ordinary, almost invisible, one bottle among millions. To German children, it was alchemy. The hiss of the cap, the fizzing bubbles, the dark liquid poured into a tin cup. All of it seemed like a magician's trick. A boy in Dresden reportedly asked if the drink was medicine, astonished that anyone could consume something so sweet on a regular day. Another recalled years later that his first sip felt like lightning on the tongue. In those moments, the children realized that abundance did not mean a stale crust of bread stretched thin, but a liquid that tickled and sparkled. A sweetness so frivolous it bordered on impossible. Gum was gold. Coca-Cola was liquid joy. Christmas in 1945 became a theater for these small miracles. In makeshift relief centers, soldiers and aid workers cut pine branches from ruined forests, decorated them with strings of paper, tinsel from army supplies, even foil salvage from cigarette packs. Orphans who had expected nothing were ushered into rooms where trees glowed with candles. Some received dolls, others carved wooden toys, many simply a bar of chocolate wrapped in tin. To the children, it was overwhelming. A girl from Nuremberg later described her confusion. How could they, who had beaten us in war, now give us gifts? Why would conquerors give toys? The question lingered. Heavier than the candy, she clutched in her hands, for children raised under harsh parents who seldom celebrated softness. This generosity was an education in another way of being. Statistics tell us the scale of these gestures. Between 1945 and 1947, American agencies and charities delivered hundreds of thousands of tons of relief supplies into occupied Germany. Flour, canned goods, powdered milk, clothing, soap. UNICEF was created in December 1946, largely to feed Europe's starving children, and German boys and girls were among the first beneficiaries. But statistics alone cannot explain the shock of tasting chocolate after years of deprivation or slipping into a wool coat warmer than anything home had ever offered. Each package, each ladle of soup was not only survival, it was astonishment. Children accustomed to hunger began to see that abundance could be casual, even playful, and that kindness could be delivered with a smile rather than a command. Personal testimonies capture the intimacy of these moments. A boy from Cologne remembered how a soldier, noticing his cracked shoes, produced a pair of wool socks from his pack and knelt to slide them onto his feet. "No father had ever done that for me," he confessed decades later. Another child described being given a comb by an American nurse and bursting into tears when she realized the woman intended to brush her hair for her. These were gestures so ordinary they would have passed unnoticed in America. In Germany's ruins, they carried the weight of miracles. Not every moment was solemn. There were bursts of humor, too. Ironic contrasts that highlighted the gulf between American abundance and German austerity. One GI joked in a letter that children trailed him everywhere, not because of his uniform, but because he had mastered the trick of blowing bubbles with gum. To the orphans, it was sorcery, a man puffing pink balloons from his mouth, then laughing as they popped. Another soldier recalled giving a child his first taste of peanut butter, only to watch the boy gag in confusion at the sticky texture. "He thought I was trying to glue his tongue to his teeth." The soldier laughed. These moments of levity softened the heaviness of hunger, allowing children to experience something beyond fear, if only for an afternoon. And yet, beneath the sweetness, a deeper conflict stirred. The children could not help but compare. At home, a mother might slap them for asking for more bread. Here, a stranger in uniform pressed an apple into their hands unasked. At home, affection had been scarce, doled out with the harshness of ration stamps. Here, laughter and patience flowed freely, as though kindness cost nothing. The realization was both comforting and painful. For some, it sparked guilt. Was it disloyal to feel safer with conquerors than with parents? For others, it planted suspicion. Surely this generosity must hide a price. And for many, it awakened a longing they could not name. A hunger for gentleness more profound than hunger for bread. The miracles continued in subtle ways. Flush toilets, electric lights, even a novelty of soap in abundance became symbols of a world beyond scarcity. Children who had grown used to washing in cold basins stared in disbelief at warm showers in American facilities. A soldier remembered one girl giggling uncontrollably as she watched hot water run from a tap, unable to believe such magic was real. To the Americans, it was plumbing. To the children, it was proof that the world held possibilities their parents had never shown them. Gradually, these encounters reshaped imaginations. The boy from Munich, whose shoelaces had been tied, now carried in his memory not only the feel of steady hands, but also the fizz of soda, the sweetness of chocolate, the warmth of wool socks. His daily life remained harsh, but these glimpses of abundance whispered of another reality. A girl who had been beaten for stealing potatoes now remembered the soldier who gave her gum and taught her to blow bubbles. A child whose mother had dismissed his tears now recalled the nurse who brushed his hair without scolding. The contrast was too sharp to ignore. These are not merely gifts. They were lessons in possibility. By the spring of 1946, word had spread among orphans. Follow the soldiers, and you might find warmth. Yet what lingered longest was not the gum or the soda, but the realization that kindness could come without punishment. For children who had learned to brace for blows, that was the most miraculous gift of all. Sometimes the smallest gestures leave the deepest scars of love.